And welcome. I've been thinking about practice a lot. And there's always this question of how do you know your practice is helpful? Because there's the old classic joke. When you meditate, you feel better. You feel your sadness better, your depression better, your rage better. But you also feel your compassion, your kindness, your empathy better as well. But I've always struggled with this question because sometimes, as you meditate, you get more sensitive. And sometimes that doesn't feel that great. So there's a story that goes back to the time of the Buddha, where he was asked by someone, how do I know my practice is working? Now, there's something around the mythology of the Buddha where he wouldn't answer a question unless you asked it 3 times, which is kind of a cool technique because I certainly find that people will ask me a question about meditation and I'll start to tell them my response. And what I've learned, and maybe you've learned this too, when anyone asks you about your meditation practice and you start to speak, be very, very attentive to the moment their eyes start to glaze over, because it can happen really, really quickly. So supposedly this person who stopped the Buddha in the street asked 3 times, so the Buddha responded. And I thought this is a brilliant response. This practice speaks of what are called, not crazy about the term, but the 3 poisons. 3 qualities of mind that make it impossible to be present. And these are greed, hatred, and delusion. Delusion is believing something's true when it isn't, or believing something isn't true when it is. And so the response is, are you more or less caught in greed, hatred, and delusion? I like to think I'm a little less caught by greed, hatred, and delusion. I'm not sure. I certainly have been tested in recent times. But it becomes a very interesting thing to reflect on. I've been on the road for a couple weeks, and one of those weeks was helping to deliver the Power of Awareness retreat with Tara Brock, Jack Kornfield, Devin Barry, and Conda Mason. And I was leading mindful movement, which was really fun to get back in that saddle again. But I got to watch how 250 people changed over days and days of practice. People were feeling clearer, they were more rested, their hearts were more naturally open. There was definitely more of a sense of being interconnected. And it's a miracle, a magical thing to me. I've been leading retreats for like 45 years, and it's just one of my favorite things because it's a journey of transformation. Traditionally, what you do on, say, like a week-long retreat, and maybe even spanning over a month-long retreat, is you spend some time gathering your attention. So you'll focus on concentration. And concentration is calling your attention back again and again and again. It's taking the puppy of the mind and teaching it how to sit. And what you find is you can't teach a puppy to sit and have a very healthy puppy if you smack it with a rolled up newspaper if it moves. But with kindness, with attention and persistence, puppy will sit. And so it's the same with meditation. You put in your time of willful effort and you start getting a payoff. You start to feel more here, more now, and you start to develop the sense of mindfulness or the capacity to observe or be the witness of your experience. So traditionally in a retreat or even in a meditation, you then move from kind of narrow focus to more of this broadening and widening of awareness to be aware of what's happening in your relationship to it. And this becomes a very interesting part of the process because you get treated to memories and anticipation of the future. And here you begin to be able to observe the attitude in your mind. this becomes a real powerful setup for insights because you get to see, for example, an old belief come up, and then you get to look at it and you get to investigate it. And this, of course, is one of the unique things about insight meditation or Vipassana meditation is if you have an anchor on the breath and something really strong comes up, you can turn to investigate the phenomena that's arising. And here we have the practice of rain, to recognize what's happening, to sense if you can allow it, accept it, but then to turn toward the experience of it, to get really curious about it, to have tea with whatever is presenting, whether it be strong physical unpleasantness or mental agitation, strong emotion. You sit with it, you have tea with it. This can sometimes open up all kinds of powerful possibilities, particularly as you explore that final stage of rain, the N, which is to kind of nurture what you find with loving presence, kindness, compassion. And so these first two qualities of gathering of attention and then kind of mindful observation of what naturally arises and your relationship to it is really, really powerful. But then you also explore on a retreat or in a meditation, usually toward the end after you've kind of done the hard work of arriving and the hard work of investigation, is just opening in the presence, just opening into a sense of natural awareness. And you can't do the third part without doing the first parts. It's really, really hard just to kind of relax and be, because the mind is quite often has a lot of agitation. It hasn't calmed. So over the course of a retreat, your practice naturally changes. It evolves. It moves from concentration, a widening to witness, and then opening in the presence. And it opened up a whole question for me as I kind of watched and as I got to think about my own practice here is, how has my practice changed? I've been at this for what? A long time. Holy moly. I just realized I've been practicing for 50 years. I learned meditation, transcendental meditation, when I was 15. Scary. So the question is, how has your practice changed? There's a teacher who recently said, if your practice is not evolving, you may not be practicing fully. We quite often have a sense of there's one way to meditate. I had that for many, many years. There's just kind of one technique and you do it for the rest of your life. I'm not so sure. Certainly not from my own experience. So what I'd like to talk about, what I'd like to share with you is, as I traditionally do, in 4 parts. First is the wake-up call, to really acknowledge what called you to practice. And how, as we go through life, first, we have this desire to be somebody. And that usually evolves into wanting to be somebody special. And that evolves into being nobody special. I'd like to talk about those stages of practice. The wake up, being somebody special, and being nobody special. What does that mean? Maybe I can explain what I hope this means. You know, there are lots of different maps on practice. You may have seen the 10 ox herding images, that talk about like the search, for presence, and all through the whole process of sort of finding the bull, taming the bull, riding the bull home, transcending the bull, etc. Well, what I'd like to talk about first is that seeking. Something starts you practicing. There's some moment in our lives, certainly some moment in your life, when you recognized that there's more to life than what you imagine. This first glimpse is, number one, really powerful, and number two, quite often fleeting. For me, fortunately or unfortunately, it was quite profound. I've shared this story before, and I won't go into a long story, but for me, it was a very powerful moment of the mystery. I was 6, 7, 8 years old. I grew up on a farm in the Pennsylvania Dutch country, beautiful farm back on a dirt road. And I was leaning against a tree. I don't know why, but this big, big pine tree behind the farmhouse. And the only way I can describe it, the only way I described it in my 8-year-old brain was I merged with the tree. I had a profound sense. And as I described it, was like the cells in my body were stars in the sky. Like a separate self dropped away, a connection to the all in all. It was that classic thing of like experiencing myself as a wave in the ocean and realizing I was the ocean itself. Hard to describe, but it was absolutely a moment of awakening, a moment of oneness. And it was profound and deep and searing. Of course, as I've shared, I ran into the house to tell my mother, and she looked at me and said, "It's wash your hands, it's time for dinner." And there was something about that not being acknowledged that was quite searing for me. And that really set me off to try to get back there, to try to find that. So that was a pretty dramatic call for me. But I guess the question I'd like to ask you is, when did you first sense there was something bigger than you? What called you to engage into active practice to find out what's real, what's true? And the question becomes, what is it that wakes us up? What wakes us out of the trance? I remember there are times when I was a kid where I would be really, really happy. And I would notice that I would be filled with this real sense of contentment. But I would then ask myself, how did I lose this? How did this fall away? Quite often, this wake-up call is a shock of some kind. It's some kind of a jolt. You know, the classic examples are the three heavenly messengers of sickness, old age, and death. Experiencing it or being around it is this amazing wake-up call. To go through that sense of loss, the sense of identity, the kind of the trauma of letting go. Incredibly powerful. The Buddha allegedly said that when you are visited by one of these heavenly messengers and you truly invite them in, they'll transform your life. And it's true. Usually it's suffering that wakes us up. As someone said, there's no better foundation than rock bottom. For some, it's waking up out of the trance of addiction. The addiction to substances, to work, to worry, to love. For others, it's catching a glimpse of the mystery, like for me. Like that sense of like, oh my gosh, there's something vast here, way much vaster than anyone's talking about. Those little moments that can be quite powerful. And sometimes it's seeing someone else who's happy, like really happy. Those first three heavenly messengers are sickness, old age, and death. The fourth heavenly messenger is kind of refers to when the Buddha was a young man. He saw a renunciate. He saw a sadhu, an ascetic. A guy was just wearing a robe and an alms bowl. He had nothing, and yet this guy looked really, really happy. And the Buddha was drawn to him, hung out with him, and that gave him this glimpse of what's possible. That's what set him off. We all, I think, have that call, and it often slips by. And it's a natural process. You lose someone close to you who dies, there's incredible poignancy, and then back to the trance of being someone on your way somewhere. Or for myself, having that mystical experience and having no one around to validate it. When my mother said, "Wash your hands, it's time for dinner," is like, basically she was saying, what you experienced does not exist. Which is why when kids talk about mystical experiences, I really try to be there for them. Not that I'm around kids that much. If you've ever had that experience of being really sick and having that contract with whoever, the Almighty, get me through this and I'll be a good person, you know what that's like. So we have this wake-up call. We also have this drive to be somebody, this natural sense of who we are as an identity, wanting to make our way in the world. When I ask people about the worst year of their life, I have a number of questions I like to ask people, but that's one of them. What was the worst year of your life? For many people, it's 7th grade. And for me, no question about it, it was a truly miserable year for me. Between being a boy and being a young man, I was incredibly awkward, incredibly ungainly, trying to figure out what I would do and who I would be in the world. Ramana Maharshi, the great mystic from India, said there are 2 questions that will reveal your true nature. The first is, who am I? The second is, what do I really want? That mystical experience I had was something that totally cracked the question of who am I? Because I had an experience of who I am that is much vaster than this small little being. But that question of who am I also coincided with a very open time in our culture, with lots of options for exploration, lots of options for research. And for many people, a lot of the research into who I am had a chemical element to it, chemical research. For some people, experiencing alcohol gives them that release of anxiety. For others, all kinds of other chemicals can open up possibilities. As a very young teen, for whatever reason, there were chemical options for me that were available, and they gave me a glimpse. I didn't care for the effect, but they gave me a glimpse. I had my first yoga class when I was 15. At the end of the asana, at the end of the postures, we did a yoga nidra, just lying down in a body scan. Something shifted during that body scan. And it was like, oh, I know this. This is that place of being relaxed and alert, feeling both a sense of presence, but also a sense of timelessness. Juicy. And after that, every night when I would go to bed, I would do that body scan and I would touch into the memory of that sense of present and yet open awareness. And I'm so grateful at the age of 15 that I learned transcendental meditation. Transcendental meditation, I'll go into it a little bit, and I'll actually lead you into an experience of mantra if you're interested. This was the rage. My mother had gotten initiated, and she paid my $35 to learn it. And it was a very powerful shift for me. Now, its origins are in the Vedas. It's sort of it has a yogic background. So you do a puja when you get trained. A lot of people are like, what is this? There's you're supposed to bring a flower and a handkerchief and a couple other offerings. And so you kind of do this bells and smells a little bit when you get initiated into TM. And then you learn a mantra. You're internalizing a mantra. And the mantra becomes your anchor. In that experience of doing the mantra and experiencing its effect, I had a profound another one of those knowings. And the knowing it was in my cells. I will be doing this for the rest of my life. And so far, I have. I gave myself deeply to the practice. And at 15, again, completely, utterly awkward and confused and lost, it gave me a sense of confidence. It gave me a sense of feeling more free, but also more powerful. But the question that I have for you is, when you first practiced, how did it land for you? What was the practice for you that gave you a sense of, there's something here for me? For me, transcendental meditation became my life raft. I felt more present. I felt more confident. I felt more creative. I was more into the flow of things. I felt so lucky, like someone gave me the keys to this secret garden. And something in me really clung to the practice, and maybe it was fear of slipping. Because I noticed that the few times when I would slip in my practice, I could feel things devolving a little bit. And with TM, you recommended you do 20 minutes twice a day. So I was very, very lucky in that I also had a sense of community. There were only 2 other guys who were into it, but they were really into it. We meditated every day, twice a day. And we talked about it. And that's what got me going. My internal practice, but also the relational piece, which is so important, which I'll talk about a little bit more. So a little bit about mantra as a meditation. It's a very powerful practice. And just as in insight meditation, we use breath or sound or felt sense in the body as your anchor, here the anchor is a mantra. So it falls under the general category of concentration or shamatha or calming. So it's a calming concentration practice. But of course, there's a very big difference between having an anchor that is in the senses and having an anchor that's more mental. So there's a commonality in that it's a way of bringing yourself back, but it's not embodied in the same way mindfulness is. Let me lead you into a little experience, if you'd like to try it. Now, a couple things before we do that. One of the things in the tradition of transcendental meditation is the mantra is important, and you're told not to tell anyone your mantra. Now, there's someone by the name of Herbert Benson, Dr. Herbert Benson, who took TM. Mind was blown. He felt so present, creative, and excited, and he thought, I wonder if I can duplicate this in a lab. And turns out that he happened to have a lab at Harvard, and he did really the first study on the technique of meditation and its effect on physiology and the brain and so forth. He could discern no difference between mantras. That you could use any mantra, you could use the mantra money, and it would be as powerful as any other mantra. Now, you can argue maybe his instrumentation wasn't that sensitive, but he kind of articulated this technique through what he called a relaxation response. That we have this kind of classic stress response that when you are under threat, there are certain hormones, neuropeptides that are released in the brain, and you move into the stress response where the blood is shunted away from your belly, your eyes dilate, your all your blood is flowing so that you can move into fighting the bear or running away from the bear. You're moving into the stress response. What he found was by doing just a couple simple things, closing your eyes, making sure you're not disturbed, choosing a mental technique. When the mind wanders, bring it back. That's it. If you do that for a little while, a different set of hormones and neuropeptides begin to get released. And what happens is the blood starts flowing back into your belly. Your body starts moving back into homeostasis, back into a sense of balance. Which is why sometimes, if you're ever meditating with other people, you'll feel a lot of burbling, like either you feel burbling in your belly or you hear gurgling around you. That's the relaxation response. So in teaching the relaxation response, he would have you just select a mantra, a phrase that works for you. I'm going on here and I'm beginning to recognize there's no way I'm going to get through everything I want to share here, but let me share a little bit about Father Thomas Keating. Father Thomas Keating was asked by someone if they could lead a meditation group in the basement of the church. And he said, sure. And what he noticed was there were more and more people going to this meditation class than there were coming to the services, which had him a little concerned. So he checked out what was going on down in the basement. He learned transcendental meditation, and it was incredibly powerful for him, just incredibly powerful. And he wondered if there was a way to adapt it so that it wouldn't be quite so threatening for people from the West. Because again, this is kind of comes from the Vedas, and you do a puja when you're initiated into it and so forth. So he adapted it, and he called it Christian contemplative prayer. A number of years ago, I was presenting at a Garrison retreat center in New York. Father Thomas Keating was one of the presenters, and so I listened to his talk. I was eager to hear what he had to say, and as he talked, I was like, oh my gosh, he's doing the introduction to TM. The difference that he offers, and it's a beautiful, really beautiful process, is that he recommends you take a phrase that's meaningful for you, perhaps from Scripture, and that becomes your anchor. So you might elect just a word, to use a phrase, maybe just peace. Or you can use a longer phrase like the peace that passeth understanding. What I find is better to kind of shorten it to like a 2-syllable. It's kind of what works for me, 1 or 2 syllables. And that becomes your anchor. You come back to that anchor when the mind wanders. Let me offer a short experience in this, because you might find that it's kind of a helpful experience for you. So you might close your eyes. We're going to take about 3 minutes for this. You might slow down your breath. And you might just choose a phrase. It might be the word peace, maybe happy, maybe calm. And just take a moment, if you would, just to sort of picture that word or that phrase. And imagine whispering it. And in fact, you might, if there's no one around, just sort of whisper it quietly, just very quietly. And then in your own way, kind of internalize that word or that phrase. And you're not trying to control it. You're just letting it be there. It might go slow, it might go fast. And just for the next minute or so, when the mind wanders, invite it back to this mantra, to this phrase or word. Oh, you might notice that there's an element of relaxing here, an element of calming. Very gently, you might deepen your breath and let the mantra fall away. If you like, you can open your eyes, or you can remain with them closed. One of the elements of using the mantra as your anchor is it's a subtle form of practice, and you sort of get it as you practice. Is that you're not controlling the mantra. There are times when it might feel very pronounced, times when it might get so subtle, like it even disappears, and yet you feel this sense of presence. It might go really, really slow. You sort of have it as a suggestion as you kind of come back to it. What many people find is that this technique is very relaxing. And the more you relax, the more you're just kind of like letting go in the presence. As Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, the founder of TM, said, the more dynamic your rest, the more dynamic your activity. And the idea here in this practice of doing it twice a day is that you get this very deep wellspring of rest twice a day through your day. And the more you rest, the more you're kind of letting go into what Deepak Chopra calls this field of infinite possibility. And then that informs your actions. So what I found in my practice was that this sense of like deep rest was informing my actions. I was getting more creative. I was feeling more bold. I was feeling more engaged. In some ways, I was feeling more egotistical because I was getting good at things. And I was really enjoying being good at things. My grades came up. I started kicking butt. And this becomes a very interesting paradox in practice. Is that the more you let go, the more life force can flow through you. The more life flows through you, the more dynamic in the world you are, the more attractive you are in the world, and the more your ego can get fed. This becomes one of the greatest growth opportunities in practice, is being somebody special, and the trap that can become. I'm aware of the time here. There's a lot here I want to share, because this is maybe one of the most number one things in practice is you become more dynamic in your life. And so for many, many years, for like 15 years, TM was my practice. I didn't know there were any other techniques, and I didn't care because it seemed to be working for me. In college, so I meditated all through high school. In college, I took a deeper dive. I was pretty unhappy, in being in the college scene. I grew up on a farm. I'd always loved nature. And I thought, wow, if I could find a place where I could meditate and also work on a farm, oh my God, that'd be amazing. And to my amazement, I found a farm. Someone who was a graduate of the college. older than me. He lived locally. This is in Wisconsin, Illinois. And his father had died when he was in college, and he took over the farm, and he was very deep into transcendental meditation. So I remember just sort of moving out and moved in. And so I was surrounded by people who were deep into meditation. And I took advanced courses. I took a course on the science of creative intelligence. I did retreats. And I found myself moving deeper and deeper into the practice and deeper into the whole TM movement and the mystique of the TM movement, which that could be a whole other talk. I'll save that one. But I'm so grateful for those years. If you happen to Google angelic organics, it is the largest community-supported agriculture in the country, I believe. Back when I moved in, it was a classic farm. We had a hog operation. We ran about 1,000 acres, and I was there all through college. Transformative and powerful, powerful years for me. So this practice of mantra really opened me up in a really, really big way. It opened me to community. It opened me to possibilities. And it opened me to a whole culture, which, if you read anything around the exposés around the transcendental meditation movement, there are some pretty funky things going on. But I'm immensely, immensely grateful for those practices. So I practiced all through college. I took a job teaching after grad school in New Mexico, and I practiced there. And then I went to the Peace Corps in West Africa, and I practiced there. Again, a story I've shared before, but one I find very, very helpful for those who feel on their own in their practice. When I was going through my training, I kind of announced to the group, I meditate twice a day, and everyone who's interested in meditation, let's all meet over in that corner at the end of this meeting. One guy came, and he and I became meditation buddies and partners through those whole 2 years. So I often recommend find someone who's an ally in your practice. It has been life-changing for me. Very, very hard to practice on your own. So let me just share this last little bit before we have to close. After my 2.5 years in West Africa, again, I was very enamored with the transcendental meditation movement and the practice. This is my life practice. So I knew all about Maharishi International University in Fairfield, Iowa. They bought this kind of defunct college and turned it into a place for getting all kinds of degrees, but also really doing deeper practices. And one of the deepest practices was called the Siddhi course, S-I-D-D-H-I. The word Siddhi means sutra, a suture. And it refers to the experiences you have in depth meditation and techniques that you can do that can be an expression of consciousness. They're kind of a way of kind of like amplifying your experience, and the outer experience of these powers, if you will, become a reflection of the inner practices. So maybe you've heard a little bit around the siddhis, the whole talk of levitation, the whole talk of like omniscience and clear seeing and all this wild stuff. And it was like the next step, and it was very, very exciting and mystical to me as 21-year-old. And I had met people who had done the course and talked about how transformational it was. So that course cost $3,000. And I had $3,000 for my resettlement allowance after the Peace Corps. So somehow I was going to find my way and give them all my money and do this course. So I was on my way. Oh, then there's a whole other piece. After the Peace Corps, I tried to cross the Sahara Desert on my bicycle from the south to the north, and turned out to be a really, really stupid thing to try. So I had my health was kind of broken down. And after a long time, I made my way back to the East Coast to my parents' farm and found out there was an ashram over the hill from my parents' farm, just a little ways away in the Pennsylvania Dutch country. So here, I met all these amazing people who were all practicing together in a completely different tradition. And I thought to myself, after meeting with a homeopathic physician, at that time, I wasn't sure what a homeopathic physician was. I thought it might be akin to a psychopathic physician, but turns out that he was a really, really wonderful guy. And he suggested that maybe the ashram would be a good place for me to recuperate after I had kind of like fried my brains in the desert. And so I elected to. And here I met the guru. I had a private meeting with him and I told him of my plans to kind of head out to learn these very esoteric techniques. And he pointed out something really, really powerful. He said, you can live in a cave and you can learn how to walk on water. But if you leave the cave and someone insults you and you react and you get upset, what good are those practices? He said, perhaps you might look at exploring purifying your desires. Because if your desires are not pure, whatever gifts, whatever vitality you cultivate in your practice are going to go to serve those impure desires. He said, perhaps the practice is about focusing on that and focusing on service to others as a way of purifying. That clicked for me. That really clicked for me. So where I think I'd like to leave this talk is to take a few moments to reflect on, number one, what called you to practice, but also to really ask yourself, how have you transformed? How has your practice changed you? Do you feel more or less caught by greed, by hatred and delusion? How much more vitality do you experience from your practice? And how, in some ways, has the fruit of your practice actually strengthened your ego? Because this becomes a real interesting part of practice. When you practice, you become more alive. You become more vital. You can do more. You're more attractive to others. There's more energy coming through you. People want that. And the trap is you start believing it's you. I love the offering of merit as part of a meditation. And let's close with that very briefly. If you like, you can close your eyes. You might take a moment to reflect on all the fruits that have come from your practice, all the ways you benefited, and take a moment to sense what it's like to offer the fruit of your practice to yourself. You might feel or imagine your path opening with a greater sense of ease and well-being. Imagine yourself more effortlessly guided by wisdom and compassion. And you might now imagine offering the fruit of your practice to be a benefit to those in your inner circle. Imagine these beings benefiting effortlessly, receiving the benefits of your practice. Imagine you could offer the fruit of your practice to all those you are yet to meet on your life journey. Imagine them recognizing something in you, in themselves. And imagine now you might offer the merit, the benefit, and the fruit of your practice out to all beings in all directions without discrimination. May all beings, including you, feel free from stress. May all beings, including you, feel happy and feel free. If you like, you can deepen your breath. If you'd like, you can open your eyes. Thank you so much for your time and for your attention. I hope this is helpful. It's so important to recognize that you are evolving. And as you discern your path, to really trust that the practices that will help you to continue to evolve are part of this journey. Embracing what works and letting go of what doesn't. Thank you so much. To be continued. Happy trails and blessings in your practice.